Dr. No in 1962? James Bond, a man with impeccable fashion sense and an unhealthy obsession with vodka-based drinks, has saved the world more times than you can shake a martini at. But by 2006, the whole franchise was in peril.
Barbara and Michael are truly on their own.
It's their careers and their lives on the line as well, because this is their whole life.
The producers wanted a reboot, a complete makeover to capture the hearts and minds of a younger audience. But who would replace the devilishly handsome Pierce Brosnan?
Sam Worthington, Goran Visnek, the guy that plays Superman.
All good choices, but instead they would choose a plain Jane, a.k.a. a normal Norman. Or should we say, a divisive Daniel.
Who's Daniel Craig? What are we doing? Why are we rebooting Bond?
They were deeply disappointed.
A Bond no one wanted.
A blonde Bond?
Blonde. James Blonde.
He was not tall, dark, and handsome.
Ian had made a big mistake.
A Bond without the gadgets and the gizmos.
Gun and a radio. Not exactly Christmas, is it?
A Bond that would prove everybody wrong. Oh my God, the introduction of Daniel Craig. So, buckle up, Buttercup. We've got a license to thrill. When Pierce Brosnan became Bond in 1996, the franchise struck gold.
You're late, 007. I have to stop in the bathroom.
And it turned out to be solid gold. With a budget of $60 million, the film earned over $350 million worldwide.
It's true. What's true is that in 48 hours, you and I will have more money than God.
Which was especially good news. MGM's current owners, French bank Credit Lyonnais, were looking to sell.
GoldenEye is coming out. MGM is basically building up its portfolio. The idea is they're going to build it up and they're going to sell MGM off.
So that when the deadline came for Credit Lyonnais to sell it, they could sell it for a good price.
The buyer was this guy, Kirk Kerkorian. Remember him?
But he was a total business guy. He should never have been running a movie company.
His love affair with MGM went back decades, and this would be his third time rescuing the darling studio.
People who were running MGM, some of them got very rich off of it, and some of them, like John Calley,
The famous Hollywood executive.
did not get that huge payday.
So John left United Artists, and he went to Sony.
When John Calley moves over to Sony Pictures, he decides he wants to start his own competing James Bond franchise.
And with those words,
His own competing James Bond franchise.
once again, Kevin McClory was back.
So he teams up with Kevin McClory, who owns the rights to Thunderball.
But the film rights for Casino Royale, as you'll remember, were owned by Charles K. Feldman.
This was always a thorn in the side of the Broccoli's.
The filming rights then passed to Columbia, which then, well, in a roundabout way, they had ended up in the hands of Sony, right where John Calley was headed, a fact that he knew all too well.
And Kevin showed up in John's office and said, now you're a James Bond expert. Look at all the success you've had with Bond. Bond can be part of Sony.
And of course, Michael Wilson, Barbara Broccoli, their lawyers, they looked at this. The MGM studio lawyers, they looked at this.
And they sued. It was a big, massive litigation, and a painful one.
I was deposed in the case.
I was deposed, and John Calley was somebody who I adored. I found myself very uncomfortably in the middle of all of that.
I mean, it was a big battle.
It was, in fact, a battle royale. MGM versus Sony. The Broccoli's versus John Calley. But before the final bill could be rung, a truce was offered in March of 1999.
Ultimately, the suit was settled out of court. And as part of the settlement, John made a trade. He would give MGM Casino Royale, which Sony had the rights to, And in exchange, amongst other things, MGM would give Sony Spider-Man.
By 2002, with Die Another Day in the theaters, Eon Production was planning its next move.
Die Another Day is a big movie. It's got ice palaces, it's got satellites, it's got, tidal waves. They're like, I don't know where to go from this. And Barbara says to Michael, well, what do you want to do? And he says, oh, I think we should do Casino Royale. Go back and start over. And she goes, that's exactly what I want to do.
Which was now possible, thanks to the lawsuit settlement between MGM and Sony.
Now, the great irony, of course, is in the midst of all of this, of developing Casino Royale, MGM changes ownership again, and it is purchased by a conglomerate, which includes a major shareholder being Sony Pictures. The whole production of Casino Royale, which they had spent decades trying to extract from Columbia Pictures, they managed to finally do it in the settlement of this lawsuit. And who distributes Casino Royale? Sony Pictures.
And while the Broccoli's were looking forward to finally adapting Casino Royale their way, there was one rather large 007-sized problem.
The problem is that you can't make a brand new movie about the origins of the character with the same actor.
After 4 films that raked in nearly $500 million, it was time for this brilliant Bond to pass on his iconic guns and gadgets.
Producers went on an extensive search for the new Bond.
But who could the producers trust to helm their new vision and usher in a new Bond? Well, Martin Campbell had proved without a shadow of a doubt that he had a golden eye.
They went to Martin Campbell and said, all right, you knew how to deliver a generation's James Bond with Pierce Brosnan. We want you to deliver another generation's James Bond.
The whole point was to reboot the whole series. We talked about making it more realistic, more like the books, gritty, tougher. Casino clearly is a prequel in a weird way, obviously, because he hasn't become the James Bond we know. It was what attracted it to me.
They wanted to go back to what Bond was from the Fleming books and also update it for the modern times. More characters now are flawed. They develop within a picture. They have an arc. They're less witty. They're much more organic, much more human.
They'd got to a point in Bond where it got slightly ridiculous. And I think it was perhaps the snowboard sequence off glaciers or the invisible car.
The ultimate in British engineering.
You must be joking.
Martin had some solid ideas to humanize Bond and make him more than the sum of his gadgets, to make him an action star.
When I started work on the script with the 2 boys,
that would be screenwriters Neil Purvis and Robert Wade.
We were just not getting there. The idea came that why don't we go to Paul Haggis and let's see what he would do.
Paul Haggis, the Academy Award-winning writer-director of $1 Million Baby and 2005's Crash.
He went back to the book. He did the end first and then worked backwards. I can never quite understand why, but he did. And 6 weeks later, he delivered a script.
Armed with a license to reimagine, the creative minds behind Casino Royale embarked on a revolutionary rethink of our action hero.
A whole new kind of Bond, a vulnerable Bond, an inexperienced Bond, a complex character, much more complex, I think, than what we've had in the past.
Basically what they're trying to do is reintroduce the audience to all of the things, the iconography of James Bond.
But Paul Haggis and Martin Campbell were going beyond revisionist.
Whether it happens to be the line Bond, James Bond, or whether it happens to be ordering the martini.
Vodka martini. Shaken or stirred?
Do I look like I give a damn?
Delving into an origin story, which, even for a member of the original producing family, was a bit hard to swallow.
When they're in the casino and they're at the hotel, he goes back to his room, and there on the bed, of course, is the dinner suit.
I have a dinner jacket.
And he's really pissed, and he comes back and says, what's this? And she felt that Bond, would already have got his own dinner suit. Why would she give him the dinner suit? Well, my argument was he's not even Bond now. He's not Bond. He's from the Secret Service.
And Barbara wasn't the only one adjusting to this new Bond.
When Sony were presented with his pitch, They were amused. They spent a lot of money, and this was the only valuable franchise they had.
Barbara and Michael didn't want a car crash of a movie like the first Casino Royale. All they had to do was convince Sony that this complete reboot would have the right impact. By 2005, the script for the new Casino Royale was in the bag, but the battle for who should be the next James Bond still raged on.
Sam Worthington was one of them. Goran Viznek, the guy that plays Superman, he came up too young.
But just as her mother knew Sean Connery would be perfect for Bond, Barbara Broccoli already knew who should be the next Bond.
Barbara saw him and said he has more magnetism than they've ever seen. I'm telling you, this guy has an it factor.
But the 38-year-old Daniel Craig was still relatively unknown, mostly confined to supporting roles.
Well, Craig was an actor who had a profile on British television. He was in one of the Lara Croft films. And he had big success, critical success, with the gangster film Layer Cake.
Do you know where I live? No. Well, fuck off then.
But the guy who would be calling the shots wasn't convinced.
Well, certainly in my mind at the time, you have Connery, you have Roger Moore, you have Pierce, all very good-looking, leading men, very Bondish, handsome.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Let's not forget about George.
Of course, Daniel is much more rugged, not conventionally handsome.
My name? If you knew that, you'd be as clever as me.
The studio also was not sold on Craig.
A blonde Bond? People were really disturbed at the idea that he was not, as described in Fleming's novels, tall, dark, and handsome.
Sure, the studio can veto Bond actors, they can suggest, they can come up with notes, they can advance a budget, advance funds, but creatively, the ball is in the court of Barbara and Michael.
A lot of people questioned, why are you replacing Pierce Brosnan? People thought that he was ejected a little bit too early from the role.
And Daniel Craig is a much, much different type of character and figure on that end. He does not have that same sex appeal.
So there was a lot riding on his screen tests.
The tests you do for Bond are pretty detailed. They always use a scene in From Russia with Love is one of the sets, and they build the set. You have a day's shoot for each person, and that's the scene, I think, that's been used in probably every audition for Bond.
And I met someone who had seen the screen tests, and without giving anything away, they said the reason why the rumoured participant would win is they were completely original, and that rumoured participant was Daniel Craig.
Now, all everyone had to do was agree.
We went to the back of Harrods to some place where we all sat in a conference room. There were 8 of us, I think, myself, obviously, the casting director, Barbara Michael, the head of Sony Worldwide, Amy Pascal. All the tests are there, everybody's seen the tests, you know, so your opinion is completely original, it's unbiased, and so, you know.
I think your odds are improving, Mr. Bond.
It's a very democratic process. You all put up your hands as to who you think, so, and Daniel won it. Pretty much hands down.
But when it came time to sell the public on their new, grittier Bond, they missed the boat, or should have.
He's coming out to the ship on the launch where they're going to be having the introduce you to Daniel Craig press event.
His introduction on the Thames had the new Bond in a life jacket. Too much health and safety, not enough pizzazz, said the detractors.
The British military insisted that he wear a life jacket.
The press just had a field day. Oh, James Bond has to wear a life preserver.
James Bond doesn't need a life jacket. The man falls out of planes without a parachute. Why is he doing this?
It's like, well, James Bond's not an idiot, but, you know, but Daniel Craig, I mean, they had the footage of him. They're getting on and they're saying, you need to put this on. And he's like, do I really have to put that on? And they're like, yes, you do.
A website broke the internet. It was started by some teens called Daniel Craig is Not Bond. And it listed the 150 ways in which this man was miscast.
I said to him, do you read this garbage? I mean, do you actually... He says, yeah, I read every bit of it.
How do I respond to that? There's nothing, in fact, I could have done. There's no response, except to just get on with it.
Unlike Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig was another actor who didn't come to the role with any background that made you say, oh yeah, I already see him as a James Bond type.
Historically speaking, Daniel Craig wasn't in great company.
George Lazenby and Timothy Dalton, are they considered the most successful of the Bonds? Certainly not box office-wise.
I met him a couple of times and he can't wait to get away from me.
With the casting of their lead characters settled, the producers went looking for a worthy adversary to take him on.
The chief in the book and in the film is not a supervillain. He's almost like a henchman. He has a few people working for him, but he's all about the money, honey.
And once again, the producers took a gamble on an actor that had yet to make his mark on the world stage.
Danish actor Mads Mikkelsen, his accent, his voice and his look are beautiful and complement Daniel Craig wonderfully.
Welcome, Mr. Beach. Was that Bond? I'm a little confused.
Well, we wouldn't want that, would we?
For the recurring character of CIA agent Felix Leiter,
Hello, Felix. What are you doing here?
producers went to the critically acclaimed actor Jeffrey Wright.
Jeffrey Wright added a new dimension to Felix Leiter.
Sorry, I should have introduced myself, seeing as we're related. Felix Leiter, a brother from Langley.
He really isn't just sitting there holding Bond's coat while Bond saves America. He's Bond's equal, and he's a deep thinker, and he processes things, and he does what he needs to do, even if he has to bend and break some rules.
It's all yours.
Much appreciated, brother.
Although Wright was captivating, he wasn't groundbreaking.
This is not the first Black Felix, of course. Never Say Never Again.
I'm Felix Leiter. Enchanté.
Thank you.
And that was supposed to be because Sean Connery said nobody ever notices Felix, so if we cast a black actor, people might notice him.
Well, despite the series reboot, there was one familiar face in the crowd.
Have you ever seen such a bunch of self-righteous, arse-covering prigs?
I mean, it makes no sense, of course, in light of the previous Bonds, but she was just so good.
Nobody wanted to see anyone else play him besides Judi Dench.
Unfortunately, when it came to the role of Bond girl Vesper Lynn, things weren't quite so clear-cut.
We tested a lot of girls, probably 5 or 6.
Hollywood heavyweights Vera Farmiga, Olivia Wilde, and Angelina Jolie were all under consideration.
We then thought about Eva Green. She had an accent. We loved her. She looked so great. And we went to Sony with her, and they didn't like the idea. They didn't like the idea, I think, because of her accent and so forth.
Having already gotten Daniel Craig across the line with Sony, they now need to do it all over again to get the actress they wanted to play Vesper Lynn.
They needed a skilled actress. She has to be believable as Bond's ally, but always holding something back. She has to be cold and aloof and fragile. Why? Because in her heart, she's a double agent, reluctantly, and if she pushes Daniel Craig as Bond on the mission too hard, she'll be the death of him.
Principal photography started in January 2006 without Vesper Lynn, but the producers had a cunning plan.
We started filming in January, and we had to have it in the theaters in November. And it was a huge amount of pressure to do that. Finally, we thought the only way we could get her was to start filming and then say to Sony, look, there's nobody else, we have to have Eva Green.
While Sony debated whether Eva Green was the right person to play Vesper Lynn, the crew needed to jump ahead with the shoot. The opening sequence was going to sell the new Bond. The screenwriters, Purvis and Wade, wanted to create a scene that had never been done before. But ironically, they were men of few words.
In the script, it was 6 lines, and now follows a parkour sequence that's going to be the best in the world.
There was, however, one little problem. Actually, a towering one.
Where the hell are we going to find a building that is half built? Because obviously construction sites aren't going to stop work, even for a Bond film. And ironically, we went to the Bahamas. There was a half-built hotel, actually. It was a Canadian company that had walked away from this. And the irony was that it was on the absolute site of where the hotel sequence on Thunderball was filmed.
But the over-the-top style of Thunderball and all previous Bond films wasn't what Martin was going for.
He cast Sebastian Foucault as Mawaka, the mad bomber who opens the film, and he does free running. And again, Bond's always taking cutting edge. Free running was not that big a deal. Parkour was just starting to come to light, and this guy's jumping around like a gazelle on a 200-foot-high construction site.
Everything was pretty much what, as you see in camera. Sebastian did the actual parkour for real with no wires attached to him, and he looked unreal.
What about Daniel Craig? Could this scrawny Bond keep up?
Daniel Craig worked out really hard and went from someone with a small little actor's build to being this big guy.
And he went through rigorous training with the boys, with the stunt guys. Daniel was a trooper. I mean, we put him through a bit of hell on that, and he did a great job. That was all him.
Martin Campbell was able to shoot this Bond with virtually no CGI.
Wire removal, yes, but other than that.
Daniel Craig was selling it. His Bond was tougher, harder, and clearly rebooted.
In the action sequences, we see the blood, we see the danger, we see moments in which we think James Bond may never recover.
That just sold me that he's the man. And I thought, this is great. This guy's like an unstoppable machine, you know. And I think the whole crew looked around and thought, this is going to be something else.
And Craig's incredible transformation allowed producers to play with expectations once again.
He emerges from the sea not once but twice in the imagery of Honey Rider from Dr. No and then Jinx Johnson in Die Another Day. And so Bond is presented as being the Bond girl in that film.
A masterful stroke from a master director to this truly iconic moment.
There was no, oh, let's replicate Eartha Andress. I never even thought about it, and neither did anybody else.
As for the femme fatale in this movie, out of time, the studio finally agreed to Eva Green as Vesper Lynn.
Apparently we're very much in love.
Do you usually leave it to porters to tell you this sort of thing?
Although her French accent was initial concern, her chemistry with Daniel Craig was incredible.
Weren't you supposed to enter so the others could see you?
Was I? Forgive me.
With Eva Green finally on set, everything was running smoothly until another actor went missing in action.
Bond played the cards, he's lost, and so he storms into the to the bar. The actor playing the barman didn't turn up, so I got the driver of my car and I said, you'll be playing the barman. Daniel said, I need an actor, but I felt I had no option. We played the scene, and the driver playing the barman...
Vodka martini. Shaken or stirred? Do I look like I give a damn?
Did it perfectly. Daniel, I think, was still very angry, and so when he delivers that line, it's very much in keeping with how he felt.
Luckily for Campbell, a brute bluntness is just what the scene required to show how dramatically different Daniel Craig's James Bond was.
Before Daniel Craig, all the Bond actors were playing the same character.
A smooth dresser.
Shall we?
A smooth talker.
What can I do without you?
Smooth with the ladies, and a taste for a smooth martini.
Martini, shaken, not stirred.
Casino Royale, they wiped the slate clean. Daniel Craig's James Bond is a different character than those other guys, and he doesn't have the same past.
He's a very different actor and a very different kind of Bond. And that tailoring, that's thanks to Martin.
Martin Campbell proved he was the right choice to direct this new era of Bond. He took big risks that kept the audience at the edge of their seats.
Like with this record-breaking action sequence that wasn't even in the original script.
It was originally written as a car chase. I just thought, you know what, I'm bored with car chases. How about we have a car chase that's not a car chase? And so I came up with this idea where the audience is going to sit back, oh, this is another car chase. No, it's not. And you just smack them in the face.
Aston Martin provided all the cars. I think we may have had 5 or 6 of those cars. And when it was done, I think we crushed them all.
As impressive as the car flip was, it was another scene that caused at least one moviegoer to flip out.
Michael Wilson asked some woman at a dinner party who said she'd seen Casino Royale what she thought of the movie, and she said, well, frankly, I didn't like it. I think it's, terrible that a film like this would destroy some landmark, take down a house in Venice for your film. And he said, we didn't take down a house in Venice. All those exterior shots, they're miniatures. We built that on the back lot.
Which he passed on to me, and I took as a massive compliment.
He even managed to trick director Martin Campbell with some of his other miniatures.
In fact, I didn't tell Martin about the model airplanes till a lot later. He assumed I'd got some footage of real aircraft taxiing at night, at dusk, what have you, and flying and what have you.
But they were actually miniatures, like this one.
It's quite a few tons in weight on hydraulics, and with compressed air and what have you around it to make the water bubble. Part of my job, as well as directing that sequence, was to make sure that when we shot it, it lined up with backgrounds we'd already shot in Venice months before.
So with the sinking building finished, the crew headed to a dry studio to film the underwater scenes.
The whole thing is sinking. The bad guys are in there. They've got Ava trapped in the elevator. The elevator collapses and plunges into the river. And all credit to Ava, because she was also terrified of doing that scene, but for 3 weeks before, she would rehearse with the stunt arranger.
I had a stunt gal down there with her to keep air in her so she wouldn't drown. She didn't just do one take and pop back up. She was in a cage underwater, buddy breathing, till she got wrinkles, you know.
She overcame that and did a fantastic job. All credit to her for that sequence.
I mean, I found her death very moving, you know, really moving. I thought, this is not what I'd expect in a Bond film. It's quite something.
It's really a pivotal moment in the James Bond franchise and foreshadows what's to come in the Daniel Craig era of Bond, where he's very much motivated by loss. You know, previous to this point, James Bond never really loses, save for Tracy Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So this is setting us up for a totally new objective for this super spy.
If you thought this Bond reboot was limited to Daniel Craig's blonde locks and his chiseled torso, it's not quite so black and white. Or was it?
The opening action sequence is memorably filmed in black and white and shows Daniel Craig's James Bond getting his 00 status.
It immediately put you back into the sort of early days of Bond. It had a feeling of the Cold War. It felt gritty, it felt spy.
And it sort of throws you, you know, there's, Christ, we're in black and white, never been done before on a Bond film.
If Em was so sure I was bent, she'd have sent a 00.
There's always the question of how you introduce the new Bond. George Lazenby, you can't see him, he's just a silhouette with a cigarette. Pierce Brosnan, you see him, he's hanging upside down in a bathroom. Daniel Craig is introduced as Bond in black and white.
Em really doesn't mind you earning a little money on the side, Dryden. She'd just prefer it if it wasn't selling secrets.
When he comes on screen, even though he's young, even though he's a little inexperienced, when you see him in that office in that black and white sequence at the beginning, you know this man can carry a license to kill.
If black and white wasn't striking enough on his own, Casino Royale opened with a bang. 2 to be exact.
To get a 007 status, you have to shoot 2 people.
Your file shows no kills.
In the opening part of the film, Bond shoots his first person and then has a fight with a second guy and shoots the second guy. And so that second assassination is what gives him the 007 status. It's the start of Bond, literally the start of him as a 007.
I just decided that wouldn't it be cool, really, for the first colour to be the blood running down the gun barrel sequence, if we can make the origin of the gun barrel sequence, right? Actually make that clear, then the blood, it's a perfect way to get into the colour of the movie.
Bringing the colour in with the blood as it comes down in the gun barrel sequence, that was a great idea. I wish it had been mine, but it was Martin Campbell's, yeah.
But when it came to the title animation, that was all Daniel Kleinman, with a bit of help from Fleming thrown in as well.
One of the things I did was to go back to the original book cover, which actually had been designed by Ian Fleming himself, which looked like a playing card with little weeping hearts on it and stuff. And I took that as a start of inspiration for how I was going to approach the sequence. I mean, obviously it still has to be Bond. It still has to have some of the tropes and the historic heritage vibe and images and atmosphere.
It had the usual Bond flavor of glamour and guns, but was missing one key ingredient: girls.
Martin Campbell said that he felt there shouldn't be any women in the sequence. The point was, at that stage, narratively, Bond was still a kind of proto-Bond. He wasn't the hurt, suspicious of women character that he becomes within the film. Consequently, decided to do it kind of almost like animation, or the way people are depicted in the graphics on playing cards had come to life. I used his stunt double to do some of the running around and shooting, because I felt that I didn't want to overtax Daniel, I didn't have him for a lot of time, but Daniel was such a perfectionist about how Bond should move. He did say, look, I think I should do this. So quite a lot of those characters running about are actually him doing it because he was so involved in wanting the physicality of Bond in this animated sequence to be correct.
And Daniel had a unique way to etch the new Bond firmly into people's minds.
I had this one shot that I really wanted, which was him walking towards the camera and sort of just revealing his face at the end, sort of going, "This is Bond," boom.
But what really makes Bond titles sing is the song.
For the Casino Royale theme song, composer David Arnold teamed up with Soundgarden frontman Chris Cornell.
It's such a kind of full-on rock song, quite an un-Bondy track in a way.
It was a new masculine rock anthem belonging to the stable of rock anthems like Duran Duran and Aha. Paul McCartney's Live and Let Die.
Live and let die. And for Daniel Craig's edgy Bond, they had to go hard.
And that raucous rock tune redefines the new masculinity of Daniel Craig's James Bond.
But the real departure from the status quo was when it came to the placement of the Bond-themed song. That's because it's not until the last few frames of the movie that our spy becomes James Bond.
The amazing thing was the producers allowed us not to play the Bond theme until that very end of the movie. It was written like that. He's a very rough diamond, you know, he is indeed a blunt instrument. But by the end of it, he's gone through both physically and emotionally a journey which brings him to become the character of Bond that we know.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
From the first frame to the last frame, Casino Royale had given the franchise a head-to-toe makeover.
I suppose I don't have to tell you how beautiful you look.
But would fans be happy with the new Bond? As we established earlier, Daniel Craig certainly didn't float everybody's boat.
From the moment that Daniel Craig shows up on screen, it is obvious that Casino Royale is a totally different animal and that they're ready to break every rule. But even when they finished filming, producers didn't know whether or not they had a hit on their hands.
Yes. Considerably.
On November 14th, 2006, the world premiere of Casino Royale took place in London.
But it kind of adheres quite closely to what Ian Fleming had in mind, I think.
Pressure was on for Daniel Craig to show the world that a tall, dark, handsome James Bond could be played by an average height, rugged blonde.
But I won't consider myself to be in trouble until I start weeping blood.
The compressed production schedule meant that director Martin Campbell had absolutely no idea what reception Daniel Craig would receive.
We never even previewed the film. We had a friends and family screening, which went extremely well.
So the premiere was not so much a premiere as a first screening. Not just for those in the audience, but also for those who had made the film.
I thought it was an absolutely brilliant film. One of the best Bond films, in my opinion. Any nervousness about Daniel Craig being the new Bond was obviously immediately dissipated. This really did feel like a reboot.
And this reboot was made for kicking down doors. Connery's leather-soled brogues never did that.
Looks like you're out to get me.
I'd love to see him against Sean Connery, though. I don't know how that fight would end.
Everybody's performance stands on Sean Connery's shoulders. But Daniel Craig owns the screen as James Bond in a way that I never thought I would see again, where he could break free of the past, where I could be looking at the character of James Bond like I'd never seen a Bond film before.
Congratulations.
There's always a lot of debate about which actor comes closest to Ian Fleming's interpretation.
G'day, mate.
Maybe George, maybe.
Daniel Craig and Timothy Dalton are often considered the closest, and that might be because Fleming's Bond they were serious tales told for serious people of an adult nature.
It doesn't bother you killing those people?
I wouldn't be very good at my job if it did.
Craig's success was a massive indication of Barbara Broccoli's insistence to cast the relatively unknown actor. And all those concerns that Daniel Craig wasn't sexy enough. Huh.
In the Daniel Craig era, things changed from the libidinal-based sexual masculinity that all the Bonds before utilized.
And when it came to the box office?
Modest opening weekend. It's not blowing anybody's socks off, but it captures audiences. The word of mouth is excellent. People keep coming back. It is a big and growing hit.
Casino Royale hit the jackpot, earning nearly $600 million at the box office, a record for the franchise.
Daniel Craig, that everybody had their doubts about, very few people have their doubts afterwards.
2 years later, in 2008, Daniel Craig returned as Bond for Quantum of Solace. But this time, critics were less impressed.
I think there was very much a sense that Quantum of Solace was a bit of a missed opportunity.
Not a very good one, is it?
And despite a bigger budget, the box office was down. So the pressure was really on for the next installment to perform.
We're both played out.
I think they really wanted to get it right with Skyfall.
Fortunately, this time producers hit the mark.
Skyfall became the biggest grossing Bond film of all time.
But in 2016, 9 years into his run as Bond, Daniel Craig made a major misstep when promoting his fourth film, Spectre.
Now, the press asks him, how do you feel? You just finished this run. And he famously said, I'd rather slit my wrists than do another Bond movie. But the press all excerpted his next sentence, which is, I'm really tired right now, and by tomorrow, I'm gonna wanna do another Bond movie.
Years of Bond-related injuries had taken their toll. He had torn a shoulder, ruptured both his calf muscles, and damaged his ACL.
He is an incredibly fit human being. Daniel Craig is pushing his limits. That, shows up on Spectre in a major way.
When shooting is halted after Daniel Craig injures his knee, leaving the production in doubt.
It means you're gonna have to shut down production for weeks, maybe months. And so Daniel Craig decides he's going to, wrap that ankle up. He's gonna take a few Advil, and he's gonna continue on. So when you see Bond walking along the edge of that roof on the Day of the Dead parade going on behind him, that's acting. To make that look good, not show any sign of that pain.
It would take him 5 long years to come around to the idea of playing Bond a final time in No Time to Die. This would be no ordinary Bond film, dealing with themes of love, loss, and time. The title design was crucial in introducing audiences to the themes of the film.
I kind of referenced On Her Majesty's Secret Service because that had an element of time passing in it. Obviously, No Time to Die has time in the title, and it is about time. It's about time has passed. Bond's time as a secret agent has passed. It kind of brings together so many different elements, and I hope it, not in a confusing way, but people get a sense of the history of this amazing franchise and amazing characters going back over so many years.
And the filmmakers took all the time they needed with No Time to Die.
Truly sorry.
With it clocking in at a mammoth 2 hours and 43 minutes running time.
It's a long movie. It's a very, very long movie. But I gotta tell you, that audience was just sitting there quiet in the most respectful way. You could feel the tension in it at the end of that movie.
I know.
And the use of "we have all the time in the world" at the very end.
We have all.
I knew a number of people who teared up.
With James Bond dead, audiences had every reason to believe that the franchise was over.
There was every reason to believe that they were not going to include the title card that's been at the end of Bond films since the beginning. They included that title card. Bond is coming back. What form, what fashion, I don't know.
This is a big jump. Daniel brought to it a kind of gravitas. He brought to it a more complicated, troubled Bond. So the question is, where do you go from here?
Since 1962, when James Bond strolled onto the cinema screen and hit us right between the eyes. It didn't take long for Bond to find his way off the screen and into popular culture.
Still is huge. It never ceases to amaze me how big it is after all this time.
The world's first blockbuster franchise is showing no signs of slowing down. But the question is, why is James Bond a cultural phenomenon?
What can I say? I was a boy growing up in Montgomery, Alabama, and you want to know what this magical adult world is like. Sensuality and exotic locations. James Bond was a window into what I thought that world might be.
And it doesn't matter where in the world or really when. James Bond and the ideals he represents are now generational.
Everyone's got their favourite Bond, and I think a lot of it depends at your age when you saw your first Bond.
The first time I saw Bond was with my mother in 1962.
As a young child of 6 years old, I saw it in August 1977, and I've still got the hairs on the back of my head when I see that sequence now.
No matter who was your first Bond. Connery?
I have no objections.
Lazenby?
I understand.
Moore?
Yes, sir.
Dalton?
Shaken, not stirred.
Brosnan? Or Daniel Craig?
Peter Sellers is James Bond.
I'm not sure that one counts. Whichever Bond is your Bond. They've all been in the same decades-long adventure, with more twists, turns, heroes, villains than any of the Bond movies. From Fleming himself.
Everything he did in the literary world was larger than life. He was a fascinating person, an amazing character. He loved to laugh, he loved to host and entertain. And he was a great writer, and a very underappreciated writer. People think the Bonds are just fun and fast, but he's a brilliant writer, and I would have loved to have had lunch with him.
At the usual spot, probably. To the original producers, and specifically Cubby Broccoli and his family, who are the custodians of the Bond name today and into the future.
It's quite incredible how they have a sense of balance between tradition, what to keep, and what to change and adapt to new times.
The world's moved on since you retired, Commander Bond. Perhaps you didn't notice.
No, can't say I had.
To the hundreds of us who over the decades have played our part in the James Bond legacy.
We were very passionate, we were very fiery.
There's blood on the carpet.
We all cared deeply.
That's how it ought to be.
I enjoyed every minute of it.
I'm so lucky. I'm more than lucky.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
I'm humbled. Truly humbled. And even though we all know how a Bond movie ends.
You always know that he is going to win. You know that in every fight, he's going to come out of it. But you still get tense. It's amazing, really.
We can always count on Bond for one simple thing.
You know you're going to have a great time. As simple as that.
You've got to have him jumping off a cliff or out of a plane.
You're going to get a hell of a ride. You're going to get terrific action.
It's got to be beautiful women.
Strong women.
It's got to be a bad guy. It's got to be a threat to the entire planet.
To me, it will always be a tried and true franchise. An amazing tried and true franchise, really.
Can't wait to see the next one. Would love to be in it.
The James Bond franchise is fantastic.